The knock on my door that morning wasn't a friendly neighbor dropping by. It was the sound of trouble. On my porch stood Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA, clipboard in hand and sunglasses perched like she was on some kind of power trip. Her first words weren't hello or good morning. They were, "I'll be needing you to sign this deed transfer. The HOA has decided your property will be better used as community space." That's right. She wasn't asking. She was demanding my property. At first I thought she was joking. I actually laughed. But Karen's glare told me she was dead serious. She started rattling off some nonsense about how my land was underutilized and how the HOA had already approved its conversion into a park extension. And then she leaned in and said, "It's not really yours anymore, it's the community's." That was the moment I knew this was an litigious entitlement. It was a war she had no idea she was about to lose. Let me back up. When I bought this place, I worked my fingers to the bone to afford it. I poured my savings, sweat, and years of effort into building a home where I could finally live in peace. It wasn't just a house, it was my dream. But to Karen and her little army on the HOA board, it was just another piece on their chessboard of control. At first, the harassment was small. Letters about my grass being half an inch too tall. Warnings about leaving my truck parked in my driveway for more than 48 hours. Fines for improper lighting on my porch. Annoying, yes, but manageable. I figured if I ignored their nonsense, they'd eventually get bored and move on. I was wrong. Karen wasn't just another neighbor. She was the type who craved power, who thrived on pushing people around, who believed that because she had a title, she was untouchable. And when she decided she wanted my property, she thought she could just snap her fingers and make it happen. But she didn't know me. She didn't know how hard I'd fought to get here. And she definitely didn't know how prepared I was to fight back. The day she showed up demanding my deed, I refused outright. I told her my property wasn't for sale, wasn't for trade, and certainly wasn't up for grabs by a power-hungry HOA president. She didn't like that answer. Within 48 hours, I started receiving urgent violation notices. Suddenly, my perfectly fine mailbox was non-compliant. My fence was too high. My dog's barking, though rare, was disturbing the peace, and each notice came with hefty fines. It was harassment, plain and simple, and she thought the pressure would force me to cave. But instead, it lit a fire in me. I began documenting everything. I saved every letter, every email, every bogus fine. I installed extra cameras around my property to catch her and her little patrol sneaking around. And oh, they did sneak around. I caught her trespassing twice, once snapping photos of my backyard, and another time trying to measure my fence without permission. Each time, I saved the footage. But I didn't stop there. I started talking to neighbors, and what I found was shocking. Karen had been pulling this stunt for years. One neighbor was fined for having a non-standard birdhouse. Another was forced to repaint their shutters because the color was on her approved palette. She had fined kids for leaving bicycles on the sidewalk and even threatened to tow a veteran S-car because it looked too old. She had been terrorizing the neighborhood unchecked. And now, by coming after my property, she gave me the perfect reason to put an end to it. I called a lawyer. We built a case: harassment, trespassing, abuse of power, even attempted property theft. The evidence was overwhelming. And when the next HOA meeting rolled around, I didn't just show up, I showed up ready to expose everything. The room was packed. Neighbors sat quietly. Karen stood at the front with her smug smile, and the board waited for me to fold. Instead, I walked to the front, dropped a binder thicker than a brick on the table, and hit play on the projector. First came the footage: Karen sneaking into my backyard, measuring my fence, snapping photos like some obsessed paparazzi. Then came the letters: fine after fine for fabricated violations. Then, testimonies from neighbors who had suffered the same harassment. By the time I was done, the room was buzzing with outrage. Karen tried to interrupt, tried to spin lies about community standards and shared responsibility, but nobody was buying it anymore. For years, people had been too afraid to speak up, but now they saw proof. They saw they weren't alone. And one by one, neighbors stood up and demanded answers. It didn't take long for the board to crumble. My lawyer filed the lawsuit the very next day, and when it reached the courtroom, Karen's empire collapsed. The judge ruled in my favor, tossing out every bogus fine and ordering the HOA to pay damages for harassment. As for Karen, she was stripped of her position, barred from ever serving on the HOA again, and fined personally for trespassing and attempted property seizure. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt unstoppable. Not just because I'd won, but because the entire neighborhood had won. Karen's reign of terror was over. People started smiling again. Kids played outside without fear, and for the first time, the community actually felt like a community. And me. I didn't just keep my property, I kept my dignity, my freedom, and my peace. Karen thought she could demand what was mine. She thought her title gave her power over me. But in the end, all she did was prove how powerless she really was. Because when you come after what's mine, when you try to take the home I worked for, you don't just pick a fight, you start a war you can't win. Karen demanded my property. And trust me, that was her worst idea yet.